We have a remarkable individual speaking today, and we also have a remarkable individual introducing her today. Sarah Himmelfarb is a student at the Clinton School. She's a graduate of Arizona State University. She's worked with Teach for America in the Bronx and in Portland, Oregon. She's just been accepted to the UALR William H. Bowen School of Law for the joint JD Master in Public Service degree. And so we are thrilled that she is staying in Arkansas to pursue that program. This summer, she will be working with the Walton College of Business at the University of Arkansas as they establish their executive MBA program, and she will be with them as they do that in Shanghai, China. So, again, let me introduce to you a very remarkable individual, Sarah Himmelfarb.
Good morning, and thank you, Dean Rutherford, for that kind introduction. There is something indefinable about the relationship we have with people on the radio. Those disjointed voices are part of our daily routine, guiding us on our commutes, often soothing our rattled nerves as we battle traffic, or for me, mild cases of road rage. But news personalities like those on NPR provide a valuable service, educating us on world events and helping us come to terms with how those events affect us. Today's speaker fulfills all of these lofty goals and takes the listening audience a step further by inviting her listeners to become part of the conversation. In 1973, Diane Rehm volunteered at the WAMU radio after 14 years of acting as a homemaker serving her family. Asked to assist the station manager on her first day as a volunteer, she became an assistant producer a mere 10 months later. In 1995, her show became part of National Public Radio's Talk Track, and audiences throughout the country could listen in on her unique interviewing style, earning her the title of Washingtonian of the Year. In 1998, Diane was diagnosed and treated for spasmodic dysphonia, a rare condition that she describes in her book, Finding My Voice. Fighting for her voice and bringing attention to the condition, Diane Rehm demonstrated sincere strength and brought hope to thousands coping with their own issues by continuing work in the industry that she loves. In 2000, Diane became the first radio personality to interview a sitting president in the Oval Office in her interview with President Clinton. I truly respect and admire Ms. Rehm's dedication to service to her 1.7 million listeners. Her struggle with spasmodic dysphonia has shown her love of her audience, as she has fought to keep her voice in the American public. This voice is so familiar that at dinner last night, our waiter exclaimed, "Has anyone ever told you you sound a lot like Diane Rehm?" Yes. Her distinct voice, partnered with her grace and intellect, have endeared her to her audience and have inspired an entire generation of listeners. I am so pleased to introduce Ms. Diane Rehm.
I must say, I'm just overwhelmed that so many of you came out this morning on this incredibly rainy morning. I woke up, turned on the television, was watching MSNBC, and all of a sudden the first lightning strike took the television down. And I thought, well, there it goes. And then someone just told me that they had a terrible time getting in this morning, and right in front of the hotel in which I was staying were parked 2 fire engines, and he thought, well, there it goes. I can't tell you how honored I am to have been invited to speak here in Little Rock, to have been invited by the Clinton School of Public Service. I feel it is such an honor because I have felt so close to those 2 people who served in the White House. And yes, as Sarah pointed out, I did have the opportunity to sit with the president in the Oval Office. I'm telling you, we were so in awe. We got there, we were told to be at the White House. Myself, a senior producer, and 2 engineers, we were told to be at the White House at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So immediately after I got off the air, we went down, got into the White House. First, we were seated in the huge press room, which many of you have seen on television. And then at 2 o'clock, we were moved to another venue. At 3 o'clock, yet another venue. And at 3:45, moved to an area right outside the Oval Office. Promptly at 4 o'clock, we were ushered into the Oval Office, and I tell you, it is so gorgeous. It is so beautiful, and it is truly oval. Our 2 engineers were all looking around, and the person in charge said, "You've got 2 minutes to set up." Boy, did they snap to. And there were 2 chairs right in front of the fireplace on either edge. And through these double oval doors at about 4:20 came Bill Clinton saying right out of his mouth, "Boy, my allergies are killing me today." And it went on from there. We had a great time. It strikes me that the Clinton School of Public Service and the Diane Rehm Show have many of the same goals in common. We both want to offer a range of ideas and information about what's happening in this world, the wide universe of ideas, of human experience, that will eventually translate into productive exploration, and to present each idea with enthusiasm in the hope of providing incentive for further learning, especially in this year of an extraordinarily heated presidential campaign. I can only hope that a message of genuine understanding regarding differences of outlook can be heard and thoughtfully regarded. I've heard many people say, "I wouldn't vote for this one," or "I wouldn't vote for that one," or "I'm going to stay home and not vote." I urge you, I beg you, do your part and vote this year. I consider myself extraordinarily fortunate to be standing here with you, in that I was born to parents who regarded learning as dangerous. They both arrived in this country in the early 20th century. My father from Beirut, Lebanon, my mother from Alexandria, Egypt. My father came here with a high school education. My mother's was to the 8th grade. Her inability to speak English remained an embarrassment for her throughout her life. My sister and I were raised with a single message. We should learn to become excellent stenographers and eventually good secretaries. But most of all, that we should marry and have children and remain within the Arab community. My father came here from Beirut with his entire family. There were 4 sisters and 3 brothers and their parents. My mother came here with no one. She left everyone behind when she married my father. long after they were gone, and they both died very young. My mother was 49, my father was 62. He died 10 months after she did, truly of a broken heart. I was 19 at the time. But long after they were gone, I realized that there really was an underlying message to their outlook, and that was fear. Fear for them that education would separate us from them and create a world where our interests and dreams would not be theirs. I was raised with one foot in America and one foot in the Arab world. As soon as I walked out of my home and went to walk to elementary school, junior high school, that's where the difference came in. And I think there's not much that could have been done to bridge that gap, since ours was not a home of books or one in which higher education was considered a value for girls. I graduated from a high school in a class of 154 students, a public high school, unheard of by today's standards, and an absolute luxury. I think there is a growing crisis in our country regarding the falling number of kids who graduate. I would submit to you that in schools where the numbers of students are in the thousands, kids lose their way, they lose their ambition, they lose their entire sense of identity as individuals. Instead, they look to groups, in fact, to gangs. This story today about the third graders who were plotting to kill their third grade teacher is just unbelievable. And yet, these kinds of incidents seem to be popping up more and more. My learning, both as a child and now as an adult, has come primarily through listening to others each and every day. In particular, in the past and now, to teachers, to athletic and drama coaches, to friends, to my spouse, to my children, all of whom have taught and continue to teach me a great deal. For the last 28 years, I've had the privilege of working in public radio, listening to the guests and listening to all of you who call in on the program. The hallmark of the show has been from the outset to offer an opportunity for civil and civic debate over the important issues of our day, allowing all of us to hear the various sides of large and small questions of this world from different perspectives. One factor sets superior guests apart from others, and that is their willingness to listen. I wonder if you remember the theme that was around when perhaps many of us were in grade school. Reading is fundamental. Well, the slogan I'd like to put forward for the coming decades is listening is fundamental. In this day and age of email, voicemail, office memos, text messaging, we really hardly ever hear each other in real time anymore, much less listen to each other. In fact, I believe many of us have actually forgotten how to listen, not only to those politicians whose views may be different from ours and with whom we might disagree. We've forgotten to listen carefully to our friends, to our colleagues, even to our spouses. We ask ourselves, why is the divorce rate so high? Why is there so much litigation in this country? Why is there so much violence? Why do we miss signs that people are sad, that they're miserable, and may even have the potential for violence, and then wake up only to find that because we did not listen, some horrible catastrophe has occurred? On a major scale, after 9/11, we heard that agencies of the federal government refused to listen to each other, refused to share information that might have helped us realize the threat of disaster. Each agency kept its secrets, refusing to talk and refusing to listen. Now, there's debate over whether we should be engaged with Syria and Iran, whether we should listen to what those countries have to say about the state of the world from their perspective. Might we not try to move this endangered and fragile planet of ours toward a more stable axis of cooperation, rather than shut out of our hearing those we continue to label the axis of evil? And on a more personal level, I believe that each one of us can achieve progress one relationship at a time by quieting our inner voices of disagreement, competitiveness, and attempts at one-upsmanship. We honor the voice of the speaker. The act of listening becomes an expression of generosity and compassion, which can lead to the creation of a new and more harmonious relationship and indeed society. True listening, I believe, and I'm listening now to those sirens, true listening is a form of spiritual hospitality by which we open ourselves to the ideas of others. We invite strangers to become friends and friends to become even better friends. Listening has always been a way of sharing, of using that pause to reflect rather than to react. Listening is a form of engagement, of opening the mind and the heart to another. I would suggest that by listening instead of talking, we may become more attentive to the whole person, and by that very engagement, we learn more about ourselves. Today's world involves taking the education we have and the talent that God has given us and going out into the world and using them. to display those gifts to the fullest. And there is not a single person in this world who does not have some gift to offer, if only we would find a way to listen. But I leave you with this thought. What the world needs now, far more than great talkers, are great listeners. Great listeners who are teachers, who are students, spouses, children, and citizens. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're going to have, mics on here, we're going to have microphones at each end of the aisle, on the outside aisles. Bob G has one, Bill has one, so if you have questions, would you please walk over there or walk to Bob and ask a question.
It's called opening the phone.
That's right.
So don't be bashful.
Come on, raise your hands and get over and ask
Here
a question.
we go.
This is our one shot. We got some coming.
Yes, Diane, welcome to Arkansas.
Thank you so much.
On your program, do you solicit the authors in the books, or do they solicit you, because you have such a wonderful, wonderful program?
Thank you so much. We receive unsolicited, perhaps 150 books a week, from which we choose at most 3. My producer, Nancy Robertson, and I go through each of those books this way. And it depends on the author, depends on the subject matter, depends on the publisher, depends on whether that subject matter fits into what we wish to do. We do a few novels, but not many. So the choice comes down to what I want to do. But we have a whole staff of 5 producers, all of whom weigh in. One producer may say, oh, you've got to do this, or another one says, oh, I'm so tired of that person. So, that's how it happens. Thank you.
Question right over here.
Diane, what do you think about the up-and-coming presidential election? And if I might ask your personal views on the 3 candidates.
Well, I think it's going to be a great contest. That's number 1. Number 2, I have interviewed each of the candidates and many of the ones, all of the ones, I think, who have now dropped out of the race. On the Republican side, I think John McCain has hung in there and exceeded the expectations that were out there for him, and he will be a good fighting candidate. He is a very decent man. I think that Hillary Clinton, whom I honor for her service, for her worldview, is a person that both my husband and I admire greatly. I think she is extraordinarily knowledgeable. She's made some slips. Somebody got on television the other day, or radio on Sean Hannity's show, a guest, and the first thing out of his mouth was, wait a minute, Sean, I'm being sniped by bullets, so I have to wait for, she's made some mistakes that have haunted her. Nevertheless, she is an extraordinarily strong, intelligent woman. Barack Obama is a brand new face for many people. He is very thoughtful, very well educated, very knowledgeable about what's happening in this world. He and Hillary Clinton have somewhat different views, but, you know, I think we're going to have an extraordinary race. I am one of the probably few people who does not believe that the Democrats are going to tear each other apart. I think that that's what Republicans hope is going to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen. So, on to November.
Diane, I'm just thrilled that you're here, and I have had this question for more than 20 years.
Okay.
So it's quite a pleasure to get to ask it this. I'm wondering, because you do bring such incredibly disparate voices, because you are capable of what I think one of your true gifts is being able to manage that whole process of bringing these people together and into discussion and getting them to listen. My question is, do you lay down ground rules for your guests prior to your show with regard to playing nice with others?
The only thing I say to them is, if you wish to talk with each other during the program, feel free to do so, but don't turn away from the mic. Look at me. Now, the other thing that I do, and people who have watched the program, who have come in to see how it works, tell me that I look like an orchestral conductor. I'm going this way, or I'm going this way, or I'm going this way, and I am very involved bodily, so that if someone tries to interrupt somebody else in the middle of a sentence, I'll go like this. But I'm not saying to them, you cannot speak with each other. What I am saying to them is, do not interrupt each other, don't talk over each other, because listeners hate that.
Considering the diversity of your guests and the many subjects you cover each week, how do you go about preparing every day to be as knowledgeable as you are?
Well, that's very kind of you to say that. I think you must understand I have 5 extraordinarily wonderful producers working with me. Each morning, we come in, we're there at about 8:30 in the morning, and we are talking about what is going to be on the front page 24 hours hence. And we're trying to figure that out. And all of us chime in, all 6 of us are talking about that. When one subject rises with the majority, that's where we go. One producer takes charge then of the next day's program. He or she, there are 3 women, 2 men on the staff. He or she then begins making calls on that subject. 10 calls may result in the first acceptable guest. In other words, there are a lot of knowledgeable people out there, but some of them can't talk very well. So they will then find someone else to balance that person, perhaps a reporter. In other words, it will take about 6 hours of that producer's time to put together a panel, and sometimes the panel is not put together until first thing the next morning, and then he or she begins to write from what she has gleaned from talking to each of these people. I am then presented at 8:30 in the morning with the script for 10 o'clock that morning. And that's when I'm reading, and that's when I'm learning. And I'm talking with the producer who's filling me in on all the details before I go in there. So it is truly the producer's knowledge that I am taking into that studio with me. Knowledge that she has gleaned by doing all of these telephone interviews. So last word is, I'm not as smart as you think I am.
Good morning, Ms. Rehm. It's
Good
a pleasure
morning.
to have you in Little
Please
Rock.
call me Diane.
Diane.
Thank
and
you.
I also want to acknowledge the Clinton School of Public Service,
Indeed.
Mr. Rutherford, for inviting all of us. You are a wonderful listener. I'm often impressed that you're so patient with comments offered by your guests. I listened to you this morning, and something I learned is that you come from a bicultural background. And I wonder what the home language was when you...
What the home language
Yes,
was.
particularly when you were younger, and your personal experience about that briefly, and maybe looking at the immigration issues that our country faces today, what you would like to share about bilingualism.
My parents spoke to me in Arabic. I spoke to them in English. I understood every single word that was being said in Arabic, and at age 12, my grandmother spent 1 year with us. She came from Alexandria, Egypt, and stayed in our house on Taylor Street. She could not speak English, so I spoke with her in Arabic. I'll never forget sitting out on the front porch with her at age 12. She had gorgeous black silky hair, and I used to want to touch her hair because it really felt like silk. She smoked, and she used to let me have puffs. I think that my appreciation for that background, that multiculturalism, as I have grown older and have appreciated it more and more, I understand where my strength has come from. I told you earlier that my mother came here with absolutely no family. In fact, she was engaged to someone else when my mother's family urged her to marry my father. I think she became depressed as she got older, and my great loss at her death, and even now, there's hardly a day that goes by I don't think of her and him, and his sadness after she died. But that strength in their minds of education at the lower grades was very important. I wanted to go to college. There was no money and certainly no encouragement for me to do that from them. My cousins, my male cousins, did go to college. Not any of us as females went to college. So I stand here, honored to be speaking for the Clinton School of Public Service. I stand before you without a college education. I feel as though I have had, however, the best education one could possibly have in these one-on-one seminars, if you will, in my studio. I hope that answers it. Thank you.
Hi, Diane. Is there a particular experience or interview that you've ever had that most tested your willingness and ability to listen? And if so, how you dealt with that?
Well, yes, I can think of one. How many of you have read the wonderful books of Tom Clancy? Well, when Tom Clancy came into the studio years and years ago, it was, I think, after he had become a success, but he had the second or third book come out. So his publisher called us, and I said, sure, I'll interview him. And he arrived at the studio. I was already in the studio doing the first hour, so at the break I came out to shake hands with him. He had dark glasses on. He was looking down. I put my hand out to shake his hand. Hello, Mr. Clancy. He did not put his hand out and mumbled, hello. I thought this is going to be interesting. So we go into the studio, and he does not take off his dark aviator glasses. In fact, what he does is to put his elbow on the table and cover his eyes like this. So I'm thinking, huh. So we begin. Music rolls. Good morning, everybody. Tom Clancy is here. We're going to talk about his brand new book. And I had read every word of that book, so I knew what it was about, and I asked him a very pertinent question. And his answer was, yep. And I'm thinking big trouble here. So I think, well, maybe he didn't like that question. I'll give him another one. And the second answer is, nope. So I think either he doesn't like me as a female interviewer, or he doesn't like the fact that he is here pushing his book, which, you know, I can understand. So I figure I have one of two choices. I will either say to him, Mr. Clancy, it's clear you don't want to be here, and you can leave if you like, and I'll just open the phones and talk to listeners, or I can open the phones, and maybe he'd rather talk to listeners than to me. I decide on the second option. Talk about learning to listen. Woo! I open the phones. First caller is a male who says, Mr. Clancy, I love your books, but you sure are being arrogant with our Diane. At which point, Clancy throws his glasses on the table and says, oh no, we're having a wonderful time, aren't we, Diane? And the caller says, well, it sure doesn't sound that way to us, Mr. Clancy. And after that, he was a pussycat. What can I say? His publisher has asked us several times since to have him back on, and the answer is a big negatory.
All right, question.
Diane, I was wondering if you could explain one further aspect of this presentation. The ability to listen requires, I would believe, have the ability to have interest in the listener. Do you find the electronic age with soundbite communications has greatly destroyed the ability to listen and be focused on the speaker?
I think it's an awfully good point. I would say that what electronic communication has done is to diminish, not destroy, but to diminish our interest in listening. We want everything very quickly. You use the word interest in the beginning, and I think what I'm asking you to do, and myself to do, is to suspend the idea of whether you have the interest right from the start. If you can do that and literally open your heart and your mind to the idea that maybe this person has something to say, and I don't recognize it right this second, but I'm going to suspend that judgment, and I'm going to open my heart and my mind, and I'm truly going to listen. Thank you.
I have a slightly different take on a subject that was raised a little earlier. What sort of specific interviewing techniques do you use to keep your guests from getting furiously mad at each other?
Well, on one occasion I was not able to do so. After the Nixon tapes were released, we had a whole panel, 5 or 6 people in the studio who had been very close to the White House during the Nixon years. I'm not going to give you any specific names, but the discussion was extraordinarily revelatory about the implications of what Nixon was saying on those tapes. And at one point, one man in that panel stood up and said, on air, "Diane, if you don't let me talk, I'll never come back to this program again." And I said, you know what? You'll never be invited. And that was it. I mean, he had had so much time, and he wanted the whole thing. And I think it's my job as a moderator, and I think a fair listener, to ensure that everybody gets equal time. And I assure you, he had it, and so had I.
Hello, Diane. I should thank you so much for coming. I got the email and didn't stop to see when or where. I just thought, yes. So I do appreciate your being here.
Thank you.
I have a question. Living in a media-driven society, how do you feel about the official media basically treating Washington as though it were Project Hollywood? And if you agree.
You know, I'm very careful when we use words like the media today. Realize, please, that the media can no longer be put under one umbrella. The media is made up of individual bloggers, of news organizations, of the network groups, of cable news, of newspapers, which we all know are in decline because people are reading less. Radio is going up, television is going down because of all of these multiple choices that you have to make. I think that what's happened in Washington is frankly a result of the disdain with which we as a people have been treated by our government. And I would point you to Vice President Cheney's "so." I mean, I was horrified when I heard that. And Martha Raddatz came back and said, "You're saying that the American people don't matter?" And he said, "Well, you know, I don't pay much attention to polls." And then said, "But the polls in Iraq show how much happier people are. How come the polls in Iraq count and ours don't?" So just be careful when you talk about the media, because you're no longer talking about one entity. And I do think that the media is trying to regain its foothold in the Fourth Estate, such an important place it has in our society. Don't ever forget Jefferson's words about the world and how important a free press is to the continuation of our society. Thank you for the question.
Good morning, Diane.
Good morning.
So, do you have a favorite interview?
You know, for the past 28 years and a half, I've probably done about 40,000 interviews. Each one, you know, I come out of that studio so excited, so uplifted by what I've heard most of the time. Some of the time I come out depressed and wondering where the world is going and how we're going to fix it. But when my kids were quite young, they're 47 and 43 now, but when they were quite young, I used to save my ironing to the end of the day and sit them down in front of the television to watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I adored him. I adored his gentle approach, his understanding of children that applied as much to adults as to children. And so in November of, I think it was 2002 or 3, he was in his Pittsburgh studio and I was in Washington, and we conducted an interview that way, and he was playing the piano a lot. And he was doing the lovely voices, Miss Meow Meow, on the air. And then I said to him, Mr. Rogers, are you ever sad? And he said, oh yes, I'm sad. And I said, well, what do you do when you're sad? And he said, I play the piano a lot. And he said, I think I'll be playing the piano a lot today. And I said, why are you sad? And he said, because my stomach hurts. And I did not have the courage to go further than that. He was dead 3 months later. But before he died, he sent me a tiny book. There is a mirror on the front of the book, and the book is titled, You Are Special. And he had signed the book, Diane, you really are special. I love you. Fred Rogers. I have that book right on my nightstand next to my bed, and I'll always remember him. It's one of my real favorite interviews. Thank you for the question.
Diane, I'm a big fan of your program, but I haven't listened to every single one. Sometimes I have other things I have to do. But
Of course.
I was wondering if you'd ever interviewed an Arab so-called terrorist or former terrorist on your show?
No. Quick answer. No.
Final question.
Good morning.
Good
I want you to note, in carpool line, instead of warm-ups and no makeup and my dog, I was dressed and ready to go because I wanted to hear you this morning.
Thank you.
And I love listening to you. And I listened to your book on tape instead of reading it because I love your voice. And I wanted to know, in the times of your treatment and what you go through with your voice, are there times of discouragement, and what you do in those moments, and how you get through that to come out and let us hear you once again?
Thank you for the question. In 1992, I started hearing a wobble in my voice, and I couldn't figure it out. Went to doctor after doctor after doctor. They all said, your voice is fine, after they kept putting tubes down my throat, which was irritating the vocal cords badly. Finally, in February of 1998, this is how I sounded. I could barely get a word out. And I was on the air that day, and afterwards had to rush downtown to the Four Seasons to moderate a panel in front of about 400 people, and got off the stage, ran back to my studio, went to my manager's office, and I said, I'm out of here. And he said, what do you mean you're out of here? And I said, I've got to find out what is going on with my voice. By then, program directors around the country had also been saying, what's going on with Diane's voice? I had an appointment with a psychopharmacologist that very evening. I had all kinds of drugs prescribed, muscle relaxants, tranquilizers. I sat home for 4 months. I would not even answer the telephone. I would not go to the drugstore because I'd have to say my own name if I picked up a prescription, which I couldn't do. I could not say my own name, and I could not answer the telephone. I saw no one except my husband and our children. Finally, our internist called my husband and said, we've got to get her to Johns Hopkins. We've got to find out if she has throat cancer or ALS or Parkinson's. And I resisted. I said, you know, I've been through so many tests. They all tell me it's in my head. Why go through all this again? Well, my husband said, we have to do this. I went to Johns Hopkins. I was examined by a first-rate neurologist and a first-rate otolaryngologist who looks like a Hollywood movie star. In 1 hour, they diagnosed me as having spasmodic dysphonia, which begins in the basal ganglia of the brain, which sends an incorrect message to the vocal cords telling them to clamp down inappropriately. So you get these little chokes in your vocal cords with the spasm. That very day, he injected me in the vocal cords, and the needle goes right there, with botulinum toxin, which, as you all know, is the most deadly poison to man. But what it does is to paralyze the vocal cords immediately so they're wide open. And then all I can do is whisper. So for the next 10 days or so, speaking to my husband, I would have to speak right into his ear. He said it was the most intimate time of our marriage. So I get these injections now every 4 to 5 months. And while I've gotten used to them, I mean, the doctor gives me a painkiller with a needle before he injects the Botox. An NBC reporter came because the Today Show did a piece on it. NBC reporter came and said to me afterwards, I mean, he had the camera on the needle. I've never looked at the needle, never looked at the needle. He said to me, I have to tell you, I almost passed out. But I can keep going, and I will. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Diane Rehm.
Thank you.